will support this. Thank you, Mr. President.
Mr. President.
Senator from Indiana.
Mr. President, I'd like to discuss today's vote as others have come down here. First of all, it's important to understand that this was a vote to start debate, or whether to start debate. And I was one of those who joined several of my colleagues saying, yes, this ought to be debated. It was not a vote to pass or not pass the legislation. That'll come. But the frustration that so many of us have had over this past year in particular of not being able to participate in the process of legislating boiled over at the end of the year. It ended with a change in the rules in the way the Senate has operated for more than 200 years and stuffed the desires of the minority to be able to participate in certain areas regarding nominations. Now there's some talk about doing the same for legislation. So that frustration has led to many of us to try to rethink, how can we get back to what's called regular order, the way the Senate has always operated in the past, the way it operated when I came here in my first tranche in the Senate. I started in the House of Representatives back in 1980. I was part of a minority for 4 straight terms. They're majority rules. And if you're in a minority, you don't have a whole lot of authority. Maybe at that time we held the White House under Ronald Reagan, and he had the ability to go above a Congress which did not support him but went to the American people. And through their efforts, many changed their minds in the majority party and supported the policies of President Reagan. When I came to the Senate in 1989, so I was asked, what's the difference between the House and the Senate? You're in the minority in the Senate, you were in the minority in the House. I said, the difference is like going to legislative heaven from a place a lot lower than that in the House. Because any senator, majority or minority, had the opportunity to offer an amendment, to offer an alternative, to offer a substitute, to participate in the effort to pass better legislation. Any senator had that, and the minority, anybody in the minority had that, and the majority leader, then Senator George Mitchell, the Democrat leader, honored that, and it was honored throughout my term in the United States Senate. I was then gone for 12 years and came back, and I thought I was coming back to that same process, only to find that no, the whole process has been changed. You don't have the rights that you once had. You don't have the opportunities you have. I came here to represent the people of Indiana and their wishes. And yet now I'm in a position where I don't even have a chance to offer an amendment. Don't even have a chance to offer an alternative or a substitute, saying, look, this may be a legitimate issue. I can't support what is being handed to us. Take it or leave it. It deserves debate. It deserves alternatives. It deserves to give us an opportunity to try to convince our colleagues that a majority of us can work together to pass legislation. And that's the kind of legislation that works, as opposed to some of the legislation that we're dealing with now that has been enacted simply by one-party rule. I think looking back on the Affordable Care Act, so-called Obamacare Act, those who supported it wish now that it did have bipartisan support, that it was worked out, that some of the alternatives that were presented by Republicans were debated and perhaps supported. Maybe we'd be in a different position now. So it's not right to characterize a vote in a procedural motion to say, let's go forward and open this up for debate, the opportunity to have amendments. And that's why I voted for it. Unemployment insurance is a legitimate issue, policy issue to debate. I can't support the proposal that was brought before us, but I can support going forward to discuss that proposal to look at the alternatives, to offer my own amendments, and to see if our thoughts, our ideas prevail. And I'm hoping that's what will happen. Now, that's up to the Majority Leader, Senator Reid. 2013 did not offer us very many, if in fact very few, opportunities to do that. We ended up on a really sour note in 2013. It was good we had that break, and we're back here the second day of the new session of Congress. And I hope that members on both sides of the aisle reflected over this period of time on how we can return the Senate to its original intent, how we can get back to so-called regular order, so that we could have legitimate debate on the floor. We can go back and forth with our colleagues. I think if we amend this, it'll be a better bill. We don't think that bill really is the one that ought to address this problem, but here's a substitute. Let's debate it, and then let's have a vote. And some of us will win, and some of us will lose. But every one of us will have the opportunity to have their voice heard, their amendment voted on, their alternative evaluated, and perhaps work in a bipartisan way to come up with something constructive. And so that was the purpose for leaving most of my party and voting for the motion to proceed, to go forward. And here we are. Now we have a chance to debate it. Senator Ayotte was on the floor speaking before me, Senator Portman, Senator Corrigan, all proposing ways in which we can offset the cost of this. We all know we're adding to our debt and deficit on a daily basis. We haven't come to grips with that, and yet the future consequences for this country, our economy, our children, our grandchildren, future generations, is something that we're all going to be ashamed of if we don't try to impose some discipline. How do we do that? We start, well, we tried many efforts going all the way back to Simpson-Bowles, all the major efforts, and we're unable to get the President's support for any of those, even though he commissioned the Simpson-Bowles group, which is bipartisan. But nevertheless, we have not to this point been able to get that large effort in place that will put us on the path to fiscal health. But one thing we can do is when we have programs, new programs, extension of programs like this is, come before us, we can say, well, let's, one, reform it so that we really achieve what we want to achieve. And number two, let's make sure we don't add more taxpayer dollars to our deficit spending and our debt. Let's offset it with something. Now, for those who say we can't cut a penny more, for goodness sakes, the organizations, the federal organizations, Office of Managed Budget, Congressional Research Service, on and on, General Accounting Office and others have proposed numerous ways of billions of dollars, hundreds of billions of dollars of savings for programs that are deemed wasteful, fraudulent. Senator Ayotte just mentioned specific examples, some in my state, of abuse of the system. And there has been abuse of, there are concerns about use of the unemployment insurance. People seeing this not as a help to getting a job and getting back into the workforce, but see this as yet another entitlement benefit that they can receive without putting the effort in to get meaningful employment. Now, we have a responsibility to bring forward measures that I think give people a connection between the unemployment and their ability to get employed. And that has been suggested by Senator Portman and others here. Senator Cornyn also talked about that. And so whether it's an offset in order to pay for this so that we don't go further in debt and use taxpayer money for excess spending when we know over here is waste and fraud and abuse and programs that have been deemed dysfunctional, unnecessary. The federal government never should have been involved in this process in the first place. Why not take those programs that have been recommended to us by nonpartisan agencies of the federal government? Senator Coburn has spent his career down here pointing out the excessive, outrageous, egregious waste that's gone on and misuse of taxpayer dollars. That's not how to run a government. My state has had to face up to this, and they faced up to it, and we made the tough decisions. And of course, there's an interest group supporting every possible thing we spend money on, but we separated the necessary, the efficient, the effective from the unnecessary, ineffective. And we now have been rated as the most taxpayer-conscious, friendly state in the nation. The per capita tax impact on Hoosiers in Indiana is the lowest of any state in the nation, and we have an efficient, effective government that has a AAA credit rating, that has been deemed a business-friendly, taxpayer-friendly, residentially friendly, family-friendly. It's a good place to live because we're not wasting taxpayer dollars and people are tired of spending money on stuff that doesn't work. Well, I've gotten way off my intended statement here, but I guess I'm expressing my frustration over the inability to participate in a process here that can bring about better use of the taxpayer dollar and more effective government. And I think I speak for a lot of people on both sides of the aisle that the way to do this is simply not to freeze out debate, not to freeze out amendments, not to freeze out the opportunity to offer alternatives. By moving through this motion to proceed, I'm hoping this is a step forward to returning to a process in which we're able to do what I just suggested. This decision is going to be up to the majority leader. If he wants honest debate, if he wants the American people to know, and all of us in this chamber to know, to examine alternatives, if he wants to be conscious in terms of conscientious about spending taxpayer dollars, allow us the opportunity to offer some offsets. Now, Senator Ayotte had a specific, and I think very compelling, offset. I mean, you take a fraction of the money that would save, and you can cover the cost of this extension, if that's where you think we should go with this. I think major reforms need to be made to this program, and we ought to be emphasizing on how getting people back to work rather than how to keep extending unemployment. But the two go somewhat hand in hand. There are people in Indiana and other places that have made every possible effort to get a job and have come up short. We need to be sensitive to the plight of those people. But we don't need to be sensitive to those who have taken advantage of this program and are abusing this program, simply saying, well, I don't have to work because the government will send me a check. When I add up all my benefits, hey, I'm doing as well as I could if I work. That is not the kind of policy we ought to be advocating or enabling here in the United States Senate. As I said, there are numerous alternatives of ways in which we can find a way to pay for this if we can also put the reforms in place that mean we ought to go forward with this particular program. Let me suggest three that, and my colleagues have suggested others also, which I support. Any one of these could work. We can say this program is scored at about a cost of about $6-point-something billion. A program, a policy which would just require taxpayers, in order to claim refundable portions of the child tax credit, it would require them to provide a Social Security number. I mean, this is so elementary, it's unbelievable to discover that a government agency has said this is not in place. In other words, if you want to qualify for a refundable child tax credit, you have to verify who you are by giving them your Social Security number so they can check to see if this is legitimate or not legitimate. Senator Ayotte just laid out situations where people were claiming 10, 15, 20 exemptions for children that didn't even live in the United States. They weren't even citizens. I was embarrassed that one of these examples came from my state, but I think it's true of all states. But the savings here to just put a good bit of common sense into a program is scored, not by Dan Coates, not by Senator Republican, by a government agency. It's scored at $27 billion. So here was a program that wants to spend $6.6 billion, and Republicans say, you know, first of all, we have problems with the program. I may or may not support extending this, but if it does get extended, surely we don't want to dump more money, more future debt on our children and grandchildren. So let's take this $27 billion or a fraction of that $27 billion and pay for this. Let me offer another option. A delay for 1 year the individual employer mandates under Obamacare. It's a legislation that I introduced here in the Senate. If the President has delayed the mandates for businesses, shouldn't he offer the same delay to families and individuals as a simple issue of fairness? What's the score? $30 billion. A third, prohibit those who are eligible for unemployment insurance from claiming Social Security disability benefits. Under the law, you must be able to work to qualify for unemployment benefits. Yet some people claiming unemployment benefits are also claiming Social Security disability benefits. Can't make some of this stuff up. Savings, roughly $6 billion, maybe more. And that, if you want to support this bill, would be a pay-for. So whether it's a pay-for or whether it's necessary policy changes to make the program more effective, including, and I would suggest, including a number of efforts that have been proposed by my colleagues in terms of better connecting the unemployed with those who are seeking, with the employers. Can't tell you how many employers I've talked to in Indiana said, I have jobs. And I've talked to others bottom line is there are people out there who look at what I have to offer. It's not the greatest, but it's a job. It covers benefits. It's a step forward for them. But they say, well, it doesn't match what I'm getting from the government, so I think I'll take a pass. This is not America, and not the policies that made America, not the principles that made America the kind of country it is. And we should not be enablers in that regard through legislation that we pass here. So I hope that we can have a full and open debate on this bill and move to policies that will grow and create jobs, will adopt a practice of paying for new spending with offsets from known waste, fraud, and abuse that has been documented by government agencies. Can't we at least do that? Can't we at least agree in the future interest of our country, both fiscally and domestically, on a number of issues, for all of the number of reasons that I have articulated or tried to articulate? Doesn't this make sense? So, breaking with them, I guess some of the past ways I've given my vote, I've said I'm going to vote for the motion to proceed. And I'm going to challenge the majority leader to look at this and say, let's run this place differently in 2014 than it was run in 2013. Let's not be afraid of debate. Let's not be afraid of amendments. Let's let the yeas be yeas and the nays be nays. Let's give everybody an opportunity to state their case, to offer an alternative, to be recognized as a member of the United States Senate in the way this Senate was designed to be, and traditionally for over 200 years has been. Let's move back to that. So what happens next is now up to the majority leader. Ball's in his court. Had we not passed the motion to proceed with the support of Republican help, then we wouldn't have given the Majority Leader the need to make a decision. So what kind of Senate do we want in 2014? A Senate that's doing what the American people want us to do, representing the people of our state with their interests, representing our beliefs about how government should be run, how it should be funded, having open and honest debate, not afraid to take votes, trying to construct good policy for the future of this country. We can't do that if this body is run by one person saying my way or the highway. You're in the minority, tough break. This is your chance, Mr. Leader. Let's give us the opportunity. Let's return this back to the Senate that it once was and always has been until lately. Mr. Leader, it's up to you. With that, I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from Massachusetts.
Mr. President, I'm here today with some good news. This week, the government will fix something that was broken. I know that some people want to deny that that's possible, but hear me out on this. 5 years ago, during the 2008 financial crisis, we witnessed firsthand that the market for home mortgages was badly broken. The fundamental problem was that many lenders issued mortgages without any concern about whether the borrower would be able to repay those mortgages in the long run. Now, why would they do that? They did it because they could immediately sell the mortgage to another financial institution. If the borrower couldn't pay, that would turn out to be someone else's problem. And we all know what happened next. Millions of these dangerous mortgages were bundled together, sliced, diced, slapped with AAA ratings, and then sold to retirement funds and local governments and investors all over this country. When borrowers couldn't make their monthly payments, the bundles of mortgages began collapsing, and the effects were felt in every corner of the economy. This Friday, that basic business model will change, thanks to the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau's new mortgage rules. When these rules go into effect, lenders will be able to issue a mortgage only after they determine that the borrower has the ability to repay it. Lenders will no longer be able to make loans they know will blow up and then feed those dangerous loans into the financial system. Because of the consumer agency's new rules, families will be safer, pension funds and other investors will be safer, our whole economy will be safer. Not completely safe, but with a new cop on the beat, it will be safer. The new rules will fix other problems as well. Before the crisis, some mortgage brokers who were supposed to be helping consumers find the best mortgage were actually taking money from lenders to steer those consumers into high-cost loans. The CFPB's new rules will prohibit this sort of under-the-table dealing and protect consumers from being tricked by people they think they can trust. The rules will also address many of the mortgage servicing problems that emerged during the crisis. After mortgages were sold off, bundled, and cut into pieces for various investors, too many borrowers were unable to track down information about their accounts. Some of the companies responsible for servicing their loans took days or even weeks to give them credit for their payments. And when borrowers fell behind, these servicers often began foreclosure proceedings without giving people full information about the options they had to modify their loans. The consumer agency's new rules will help clean up the mortgage servicing industry so more families can keep up with their payments and stay in their homes. CFPB Director Rich Cordry and his hardworking and incredibly talented staff have worked for a long time to put these new rules together. And the rules will reshape the mortgage market for the better. They will give people a better chance to buy homes and a better chance to keep those homes. And they will force mortgage lenders and servicers to compete by offering better rates and better customer service, not by tricking and trapping people. These rules will help markets work better, and they will reduce the risk that the economy will crash again. Our work is not done. The march toward financial reform has been too slow, and the chances of another crisis, while dialed back in some areas, remain unacceptably high in others. Even today, the too-big-to-fail banks that nearly crashed the global economy in 2008 are nearly 40% bigger than they were back then. Yes, we have more work to do on dangerous banking practices, but this week marks an important milestone. 6 years ago, I noted that it was impossible to buy a toaster with a 1 in 5 chance of bursting into flames and burning your house down. But it was possible to take out a mortgage that had the same 1 in 5 chance of putting a family out on the street. The point was that consumers had the Consumer Product Safety Commission to keep people safe from dangerous toasters, and they needed the same kind of agency to keep people safe from dangerous and deceptive financial products. In the years since, we've built that agency, and it has already returned nearly $1 billion to consumers who were cheated, and it's helped tens of thousands of consumers resolve complaints against financial institutions. And now, this Friday, that agency will put in place some common sense rules that will make a real difference for millions of families who own or who hope to own their own home. The Consumer Bureau's new mortgage rules show, once again, that government can fix problems. Sure, we have to work hard. We have to fight against those who benefit from a broken system, and we have to stick with it even when the odds are against us. But when we do those things, real change is possible in this country. We're seeing that up close this week. Thank you, Mr. President. I suggest the absence of quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.
Earlier today, senators voted 60 to 37 to move forward with the unemployment insurance benefits bill, the extension bill, which would extend for 3 months those unemployment benefits, which lapsed at the end of September 2013. 6 Republican senators voting in favor, as did all Democratic senators. They are in a quorum call now, and Earlier, we showed you some of the comments of Senate Democratic leadership. Next up from today's party lunches, Senate Republicans on today's vote.
Just crossing to the other side.
Well, Happy New Year, everyone. As you know, we're in the post-cloture period on the unemployment insurance bill the majority leader has brought up, and it raises the question that is all too often raised around here these days: are we going to have amendments or not? I'm not going to make this into a quiz because I don't think any of you would get the answer right, but you'd be interested to know that there have been four roll call votes on Republican amendments since July. 4. This is the Senate under the current majority leader. I expect he said to you he would decide whether we would have any amendments. He would decide whether they were reasonable. The Senate hadn't been run this way in its history. It's been open for amendments and discussions. A number of my members have amendments that they would like to offer related to jobs and employment. Senator Ayotte, Senator Paul, Senator Hatch and I have a proposal. It's really not the responsibility of the majority leader to tell the minority whether they can have votes. That's not his job, to dictate to us whether we can have votes or to decide for himself whether our amendments are appropriate to be considered. So we begin the Senate new year the way we ended the Senate last year, with a dysfunctional Senate, almost entirely the responsibility of the majority leader. This really needs to change. The American people sent all of us here, expected us to have an opportunity, to have an input, to be able to offer amendments, to be able to get votes, to be able to advance legislation. I hope this will stop in the near future. Second point I would make is clearly there's been a full-scale effort here by the President and his allies to change the subject away from Obamacare. Obamacare is a catastrophe for the country. Premiums are going up, jobs are being lost, the new health insurance premium tax is kicking in this month. We obviously intend to continue discussing the number one domestic issue on the minds of the American people, and that is Obamacare and what it is doing to their health care.
And at home over Christmas, that's what people wanted to talk about, the health care law and the impact on their personal lives. Since the first of the year, there are more things that we know about the health care law. There are also a number of things we don't know about the health care law. We do know now, with additional states reporting, there are over 5 million individuals who have gotten notice that their health insurance was being canceled.
I ask unanimous consent that the quorum call be dispensed with.
Without objection.
Madam President, thank you. Last night, here in the Senate, we confirmed Janet Yellen to be the next chairman of the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve System. I firmly opposed her confirmation. In 2010, I also voted against Dr. Yellen's nomination to serve as vice chairman of the Federal Reserve. I will explain. At that time, I stated my deep concerns about Dr. Yellen's Keynesian bias toward inflation as a member of the Federal Open Market Committee and her poor record of bank regulation as president of the San Francisco Federal Reserve. Those concerns have not faded. Rather, they're magnified in light of the importance of the position to which Dr. Yellen has now been confirmed, that is, the chairman of the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve. Madam President, it's not just that the chairman of the Fed is perhaps the most powerful individual in the global economy, it's that the institution itself is in utterly uncharted waters. I believe that we need a Federal Reserve chairman with the record and resolve to navigate our economy through this incredibly delicate situation. In my judgment, I thought Dr. Yellen was not that person. Madam President, the Federal Reserve's balance sheet currently stands at $4 trillion. And I ask unanimous consent to place in the record a copy of the balance sheet as of January the 1st of this year.
Without objection.
Thank you, Madam Chair. A recent Bloomberg analysis contains figures that help us put this staggering number, $4 trillion, into perspective. I also ask unanimous consent to place that article in the record.
Without objection.
Thank you, Madam. The article contains the following three comparisons that I found more than interesting. $4 trillion is equivalent to 24%, Madam President, of the U.S. GDP. That's greater than the GDP of the world's fourth largest country, Germany. Think about it. $4 trillion is twice the amount of all student and auto debt in this country. Yes, $4 trillion far surpasses even the amount of money that the federal government spends in an entire year. Madam President, this brings me to my next point. Many hold the misconception in this country that China is the world's largest owner of U.S. debt. That's not true. In fact, Madam President, the Federal Reserve balance sheet shows that the Federal Reserve itself is by far the largest holder of U.S. Treasury bonds. With $2.2 trillion in Treasury debt, the Fed holds nearly $900 billion more than China does, if you can think in those terms. Madam President, the Fed holds more in Treasury bonds than do China and most of the Eurozone combined. Madam President, the rate of acceleration with which the Federal Reserve is purchasing treasuries should be alarming to all Americans. On the day of President Obama's first inauguration, the Federal Reserve held $475 billion in treasuries. Today it holds $2.2 trillion in treasuries. That represents a 363% increase in the past 5 years. And it's no coincidence that President Obama has greatly accelerated our national debt over that same period of time. There's a connection here. When he took office, the national debt stood at a large $10.6 trillion. That's a lot of money. Today, it stands at $17.3 trillion, 5 years later. The Federal Reserve is aiding, I believe, and abetting the failed policies and the reckless spending of the Obama administration. But the Fed's binge on treasuries alone doesn't tell the full story of his exploding balance sheet. The Federal Reserve's portfolio is also loaded with nearly $1.5 trillion of mortgage-backed securities. I've long been concerned that this aggressive and extraordinary purchasing program is artificially propping up home prices, and this is especially pertinent since an overheated housing market greatly contributed to the financial crisis that caused this situation in the first place. Taken all together, Madam President, the Federal Reserve has added more than $3 trillion to its balance sheet since early 2008, just before the investment bank Bear Stearns failed and the Federal Reserve stepped in. Now, I realize that sometimes it's easy to become lost in all of these huge figures that I've been sharing. I brought a simple chart that illustrates the magnitude of the Federal Reserve's actions. It shows here the size of the Federal Reserve's balance sheet by decade, from its creation in 1913, 100 years ago, to the present day. As you can see, it took 95 years for the Federal Reserve's balance sheet to reach $1 trillion. But look at the incredible spike in just the few years since, in the red here. Here we are today, just 5 years later, at $4 trillion and growing. Madam President, let's call this what it is, a backdoor stimulus program through monetary policy. Very complicated, yes, but very important. It dwarfs even the fiscal stimulus package that President Obama ran through Congress during his first days in office about 5 years ago. President Obama's fiscal stimulus package totaled $787 billion, a lot of money. And I've just described the Fed's monetary stimulus package is nearly 4 times larger and growing. Madam President, this highly unconventional monetary policy poses huge risk to our economy, namely inflation in the future and the devaluation of our currency. I realize that current inflation expectations are relatively low and hopefully anchored. Again, we're in completely uncharted territory. Should inflation expectations become unglued, prices could increase uncontrollably. There's simply no playbook that I'm aware of on how to deal with such a situation successfully. And yes, Madam President, I also understand that the Fed has recently announced that it will modestly scale back its so-called quantitative easing program. The Fed will still purchase tens of billions of dollars of securities each month. But make no mistake, Madam President, the Fed's balance sheet will continue to expand rapidly. How long will this continue? We don't know. How large will the Fed's balance sheet ultimately grow? We don't know. Will the Fed be able to contain inflation if it does begin to rise? Again, we don't know. And when will the Federal Reserve actually begin to unwind the balance sheet, which will be tricky? Again, we don't know. How exactly does the Federal Reserve plan to unwind the balance sheet? Again, Madam President, we don't know, and I don't believe they know. I raise these points because I met with Dr. Yellen in my office and attended her confirmation hearing in the Banking Committee. I received no meaningful answers to any of those questions, only the usual platitudes that so often mark such meetings. If I can, I will now turn briefly to the subject of bank regulation, which is very important in this country, a primary and critical function of the Federal Reserve. I've been a member of the Banking Committee since I first came to the Senate in 1987. I served on the committee through many difficult times in the financial markets, including the savings and loan crisis and the 2008 financial crisis. In all of my experience, Madam President, I've never seen a financial institution fail that was well managed, well capitalized, and well regulated. The fact is, Madam President, so many financial institutions failed in 2008 and 2009, in no small part because the Federal Reserve failed spectacularly in its role as our regulator. I think that's a given. As president of the San Francisco Fed from 2004 to 2010, Dr. Yellen presided over a regional housing bubble and failed to restrain the excesses in the market. Yet, despite this record of failure, she now runs the most powerful bank regulatory institution in the world, the Federal Reserve. Failure, I guess, begets promotion in President Obama's view. We've seen it time and again. This is all the more important considering that the Fed gained even greater power under the Dodd-Frank financial regulation law, despite the fact that the Federal Reserve's own failures contributed to the need for financial reform in the first place. Madam President, in light of Dr. Yellen's weak touch as a bank regulator and her strong inclination to print more and more money, I firmly opposed her nomination. Only time will tell, but I believe that a vote in the affirmative is one that many of my colleagues will come to regret. Thank you, Madam President. I yield the floor. Suggest absence from quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.
No more votes expected here in the Senate today. Earlier, lawmakers voted to advance a bill extending unemployment benefits. That vote was 60 to 37, with 6 Republicans joining all Democrats and independents in voting to move forward with debate. A couple of tweets from the Hill newspaper. GOP senator proposes UI amendment, that's unemployment insurance amendment, with new Obamacare exemption. Another tweet from the Hill. Senator Reid open to paying for jobless aid. Here are some of Senator Reid's remarks from earlier today.
Excuse me.
I think most everyone knows that in America today, the rich are getting richer, the poor are getting poorer, and the middle class is being squeezed. I don't begrudge rich Americans the success they've had. That's part of our system, and I think that's good. But we have to make sure that we don't try to grow our economy from the top down. We need to build from the middle out. We haven't been doing that. That's why I'm pleased that 6 of my Republican colleagues joined in moving forward. I have said, and I certainly congratulate Senator Heller in bringing 5 people with him. That's important for America. Even as our economy continues to show signs of improvement, there's still only 1 job opening for every 3 people out of work. In Nevada, not extending unemployment benefits cut almost 20,000 people from the rolls. These Nevadans and the more than 1 million Americans who've lost a way to survive is extremely difficult. This insurance is a lifeline for them. I don't think anyone would consider about $300 a week much of a lifeline, but that's the average. But it certainly is $300 a week better than nothing. These are long-term unemployed. My colleagues say they want to pay for this bill. This is new religion for them because all 5 times that President Bush signed extended unemployment benefits, it wasn't paid for. So I say to my Republican colleagues, this is a 3-month extension. Let's pass this bill so that our fellow Americans, more than 1 million of them, don't have to suffer and can keep, and we can then talk about the long-term plan. It's the right thing to do. People across the country are watching us because the vast majority of Americans support extending these unemployment benefits.
Senator Reid, are you open to allowing amendments on this?
The question is, am I open to allowing amendments on this? Well, here's where we start. Senator McConnell says that he wants to pay for these extended benefits. Remember, never done with President Bush. He wants to pay for them by whacking Obamacare. That's a non-starter. So if they come with something that's serious, I'll talk to them. But right now, everyone should understand the low-hanging fruit is gone. We've scavenged every place we could go. I talked to the White House an hour or so ago, talked to Jack Reed. We know how desperate these 1.2 million Americans are. But we have to be realistic too. We know the Republicans are not going to allow us to close these long overdue tax loopholes. So they come up with all this chicanery like whacking Obamacare more.
Senator Reid, so the answer is no?
The answer is we'll take a look if they have something that's serious.
Senator Reid, what about the vote on the possibility of an unemployment extension offset as well as the agreement itself, the Farm Bill? How's the conference going and could that money be used for unemployment?
The Farm Bill is less than $20 billion. I understand that they've cut some of the savings we had before. Senator Stabenow thinks that sometime this week the conference could be completed. I hope that's the case, and certainly that's a place we could look for some money.
Senator Reid, do you plan to bring Iran sanctions legislation from your colleagues to the floor?
We have a bipartisan bill that's been filed. We have, they're gathering co-sponsors at this time. I haven't talked to Secretary Kerry for some time. I haven't talked in any detail to Senator Menendez for a week or so. So we'll wait and see what develops. As you know, it's an issue that is important, and the Iranians have to understand that we're not going to let them have a nuclear weapon.
Senator Reid, Senator Kirk, who occasionally votes with you guys, says that you're not really being very serious with the pay for it, and that you're making Republicans take painful votes to score political points. Would you,
on what?
On unemployment insurance.
Votes, plural? We've only had one vote.
So far, yes.
Well, you have to talk to Senator Kirk. I don't know what he's talking about. And anyway, that's enough.
Senator Reid?
Yes.
Did you get an update on the omnibus we're sending in the call?
Yes, I sure did.
What did she tell you?
She is cautiously optimistic. She believes we should be able to get this done. She reported to the caucus today. You can talk to her in more detail. But she said they've made a lot of progress. There's been, I don't know how many of the subcommittees, but I think 7 or 8 of them have been closed out. So we're waiting to see.
Would some of these bills go by CR in a package?
She does not want anything to go by CR. And I don't either.
Senator Reid, are you open to a paid-for unemployment extension? I know it's never been done, but would you accept one if you had to pay for that?
I personally am not in favor of a paid-for unemployment insurance. It's an emergency, and I'm not in favor of it. But if they have something, I'll bring it to my caucus, and we'll take a look at it.
The White House indicated their position on a pay-for?
I talked to Dennis McDonough today before I came to my caucus, the President's Chief of Staff, and he said they'll run the traps on this. You know, it's really hard to find anything, and it's, as one of my senators mentioned at the caucus, it's really doesn't make a lot of sense to take something out of the economy that's creating jobs to pay for unemployment compensation. Everyone knows that for every $1 we put into unemployment compensation, we get $1.50 back. Yes?
So he said he's going to run the traps, though, to see if it works?
He's kind of saying, like I'm saying, certainly for this 3 months, this definitely should not be paid for. If they can come up with some, they meaning the Republicans, something that's reasonable for a year-long extension, we'll take a look at it.
The Republicans come up with an extension. The Speaker Boehner said he's willing to listen to Democrats. I guess that means nothing.
I'm sorry, he said what?
Speaker Boehner said he's willing to listen to Democrats on an offset. So should the onus be on them or here in the Senate?
Well, they're the one that want it paid for. Why should we be looking? We don't think it should be paid for. Why should the onus be on us?
They don't want to do it, though, at all.
Who's they?
The House Republicans.
Well, if they want unemployment compensation to pass, they have a funny way of showing it.
Senator Reid, is it your belief that even if you don't allow offsets, that the pressure on these 6 Republicans who voted today will be so great that they will have to vote to end debate on the bill?
You know, this is not a question of putting pressure on people. It's a question of taking care of people who are seriously in trouble. This is not a handful of people around the country that have few problems. Tens of thousands of veterans unemployed, long-term unemployed. So this is just basic fairness. Basic fairness. How can you in good conscience say we want this paid for when, talk about John McCain's chief economic advisor, Mark Zandi is one of the economists, and there's scores of them, that said for every $1 put into unemployment compensation, get $1.50 back. What are they talking about, paying for this? Thanks, everyone.
A half dozen Republicans voted with all the Democrats and independents to move forward with debate on the 3-month extension of unemployment benefits that Senator Reid was just talking about. Later on, Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell of Kentucky said he and his rank and file would seek changes to the bill.
Crossing to the other side.
Well, Happy New Year, everyone. As you know, we're in the post-cloture period on the unemployment insurance bill the majority leader has brought up, and it raises the question